things on YouTube and Roots at the end.
He's
Go,
absent
go,
today.
go, go.
We are live.
All right, I'd like to call to order the Thursday, March 2nd Planning Commission.
Chair Dennison,
Here.
Vice Chair Hutt,
Here.
Commissioners Pevsner,
Here.
Simcock, and Yo.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
And second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next up is approval of minutes of the February 16th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting.
I have one correction. On line 169 to 170, I said that I went to the City Council meeting about the appeal of Alverno, but I will not attend the second meeting. So I invite any other planning commissioners who can make it to go, but just want to clarify that one bit.
All right. Any other edits?
I wasn't here, so I recuse.
Hearing none, I will look for a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye.
And I must abstain.
Any abstentions?
Aye.
3 yeas, 1 abstention. Next up is our council liaison report. Anything to report?
We have nothing to report at this time, and we would invite a commissioner to come to the next city council meeting next week on the 14th, but I would refer to the agenda on the Thursday coming out to assure that we agendize the Alverno project and the appeal to see if we need one of you guys there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilperson Lowe. Next up is community input. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not on the agenda. The Commission welcomes your attendance and participation. When addressing the Commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 3 hours to assure an orderly and timely meeting.
Better watch out, someone's gonna show up.
Seeing nobody, we will move on to a presentation from Mr. City Attorney.
Thank you, Chair. If we can get the presentation up on the screen, please. So this is a continuation of the 2021-2022 legislative session updates. In the first presentation, we went through some of the planning and land use bills. This one's actually going to focus on other things that are relevant to this body, including the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. And then for the third part of the presentation, we're going to finish up with the big land use and planning bills that were adopted in the last legislative session. So the first one, this has to do with the Brown Act, AB 2647. So as you probably know, the default rule under the Brown Act is that documents other than the agenda, so not the staff report, not presentations, not agreements, documents other than the agenda do not need to be posted 72 hours in advance. The agenda must be posted 72 hours in advance under the Brown Act. But if public records are shared with the City Council less than 72 hours before the meeting, those public records need to be made available for public inspection at a place designated by the city. Basically the city clerk's office or somewhere in City Hall. So if we share it with the council members of the public need to have access to those documents as well. Physical, they need to access it at a physical location. So this was the rule, and this oddball case came out, and I say it's an oddball case. The fact scenario I'm going to provide happens almost every single meeting. It just so happens that this case happened to litigate it. In Sierra Watch versus Placer County, the county was negotiating a development agreement, and a memo was emailed out to the County Board of Supervisors informing them that they're working on this development agreement last minute, but they're going to get it to the supervisors for review. So maybe like a day before the actual vote on this development agreement, staff gets it to the supervisors, and then they have a physical copy. Unfortunately, they can't get it in City Hall because City Hall is closed at that time, so they provide a physical copy in the front here at the meeting. So they just print out a bunch of copies, they leave it out there. And the opponents of this development agreement, after it got approved, challenged it, saying it wasn't physically available to us for inspection at the place designated by the city, which is City Hall, the counter, or the city clerk's office. And they were successful. So the legislator made this little fix here. So if within that 72-hour period before a meeting, staff distributes documents to the legislative body, it's okay if they don't provide it at the same time, they don't make it available at a physical location if they post it on the website, and then as soon as the city hall is open, again, whenever that next time is, that it's physically available at that location. So it's just a little fix. It's really a staff issue, but you know, a Brown Act rule worth noting and covering if you're not familiar with it.
So Placer County didn't have a website to post it on?
Placer County posted it on their website, and they made it available at the front here when people entered into the council or supervisor chambers. But at that time,
There was no exception.
yeah, there was no exception. The law said it had to be physically present at whatever the county recorder's office or wherever they have those documents.
Was it significant? The Cyril Wash Company, I mean, were they contesting the
They
development?
had to do they had to go through that whole procedure over again. They had to rehear the development agreement, and
What I
Take a
mean
vote.
is the people suing, were they doing it for a reason because they were opposed to the development agreement of
they
some
are-
sort?
they were opposed to it. I don't know on what grounds. Yeah. So this one's a significant one. Teleconferencing, SB 2449. If you attended the ethics training I did in December, you're probably this is gonna be a review. But the Brown Act, again, has default rules for teleconferencing. The problem is with these default rules is that if you're going to be absent and call in, you have to provide the location from where you're calling in from ahead of time to staff, and that location needs to be made publicly accessible. Oftentimes people take calls from their homes, for example. They don't want to make their homes publicly accessible. So that's why the default provisions aren't commonly used. Now the subdivision E you see here in column 2, the legislator created that when the state of emergency was declared because no one wanted to come into City Hall. So what they did is they said, all right, we're waiving all the Brown Act rules. At first, that's what the governor did. The governor just waived all the Brown Act rules related to teleconferencing. And then the legislator came in and said, all right, we're going to adopt this new subdivision E that says everyone can meet remotely, and you don't have to post where you're meeting from, and you don't have to make that space available to the public. But the executive, the emergency has officially ended. It ended on February 28th. So we are 2 days out of the state of emergency, and we can't rely on subdivision E anymore. So in anticipation of that, the legislator adopted subdivision F. So the legislator now says, you don't have to use the default provisions, meaning you don't have to notice where you're at and you don't have to make that publicly accessible if you use the subdivision F provisions, and those are for either you have to have a just cause, or there needs to be emergency circumstance. Just cause means a child care or caregiving need of a child, parent, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, so someone in your immediate family, basically. A contagious illness that prevents a commissioner from attending in person. So if you're feeling sick, but you want to participate, you can do so under this just cause provision. A need related to a physical or mental disability, and travel while on official business of the city, which is probably more relevant to council members than it is for commissioners. Emergency circumstance means a physical or family medical emergency that prevents a commissioner from attending in person. So if you hurt yourself, you're going to the hospital or something, and you want to participate, you can under the emergency circumstance exception. Now, if you look at the first column there, the reason for the meeting, under the second column, in-person participation of a quorum of members. Under subdivision F, you need a quorum, physically present at City Hall. So max only 2 commissioners can take advantage of the subdivision F provision. Methods of member participation in teleconference meetings. Under the default rules, you can call in, it can be teleconference, doesn't matter. Under subdivision E, it was the same thing. During COVID, you can call in, you can teleconference, doesn't matter. Under subdivision F, it needs to be a video call. They need to both see your face and hear your voice. Required opportunities for public participation. If we offer the commissioner the opportunity to participate remotely, we also need to offer that same opportunity to members of the public. Not to say that it's going to be in the same space that the commissioner is occupying. They don't have to go to the commissioner's home, but they need to be able to call in or have a Zoom call in. Required course of action if a disruption prevents a broadcast of a meeting or public abilities to comment. So if Zoom goes down, then that member of the commission can't participate, but it also means members of the public potentially can't participate, so the meeting has to be put on hold. So if we're going subdivision F route and there's some Zoom issue, we have to pause the meeting, and if we can't resolve it, we continue the meeting to another time. Under subdivision F, if it's just cause, you do not need to provide a reason, or rather the reason doesn't need to be approved by your fellow commissioners. But if there's an emergency circumstance, the reason must be approved by the rest of the commissioners. So what happens is, because these emergency circumstances probably happen last minute before the agenda's published, so you would let Director Gonzalez know. Director Gonzalez would announce that Commissioner X is not able to participate because of an emergency circumstance, and then a vote would be taken to allow Commissioner X to participate.
So that it says approved by the city council. That just means whatever body it is. So it would be
Whatever
the planning-
legislative body,
okay,
yeah. This was drafted originally for the
Yeah.
city council. Votes, anytime we're having a remote meeting, even if one member is just participating remotely, it has to be a roll call vote. So Director Gonzalez is going to call out each individual. There's no voice votes. It's no yes, yay or nay. Director Gonzalez will call out each individual's name and determine how they vote. Teleconference location isn't included on the agenda, and there is an annual limit on the number of times individuals can use the subdivision F exception. So it's not a limit on the body, it's a limit on the individuals. Any questions on teleconferencing?
Did I hear you say one of the exceptions under subdivision F was mental disability, childcare, contagious illness? Did you say physical and mental illness?
It said physical and mental disability. I don't know what that means because it's not defined,
Yeah.
but I imagine it's not mental incapacity.
Okay.
You can still vote. So
Yeah. It would have to be something
Never seen that
different.
before. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Orderly conduct at meetings. So before I get into this one, let me just provide the case that triggered this law. In Acosta versus City of Costa Mesa, the City Council considered whether to enter into an agreement with Immigration and Customs Enforcement to have its police officers designated as immigration agents with the authority to enforce federal immigration law in the city. Plaintiff Acosta was present at the meeting, and during his public comment, he called the mayor a racist pig. Acosta repeated his comment, which prompted the mayor to cut Acosta's speaking time short by calling for a recess. When the meeting continued, Plaintiff Acosta asked members of the audience during his public comment period whoever supported his viewpoint to stand. And despite warnings from the mayor not to do so. So he said whoever's interested stand, or whoever agrees with me stand. A bunch of members from the public stood up and remained standing. The mayor then again called a recess, and the officers attempted to escort Plaintiff Acosta out of council chambers. Plaintiff Acosta resisted removal and was later arrested, and the court affirmed that the mayor neutrally and constitutionally applied the city's decorum rules to Acosta. Contrary to Acosta's assertions that the evidence shows that the mayor only feared a disruption and not that an actual disruption occurred, he properly instructed the properly instructed jury could have also found that the meeting was actually disrupted by Acosta addressing the audience and the audience's reaction to his urging them to stand. So let me get this case. Prior law, mayors and the chair in this case always has the opportunity to remove members of the public. If they're being disruptive, the chair should always provide a warning first before trying to remove a member. But prior law didn't expressly provide a definition for what constitutes disruptive behavior. Now we have a definition. The definition is, the basic dictionary definition, but importantly, the statute provides two examples. Failing to comply with reasonable and lawful regulations adopted by the legislative body related to public comment or any other law. So if someone exceeds their 3-minute speaking requirement and just won't sit down, they can be removed. Engaging in behavior that constitutes a use of force or a true threat of force. If someone threatens this commission or any member of the public, you can have that person removed. Next slide. Disclosure of architectural work, SB 1214. So federal copyright law, this is a Public Records Act issue. Federal copyright law prohibits the unauthorized copying of architectural work. Architectural work means the design of a building as embodied in a tangible medium of expression, including a building, architectural plans, or drawings. The Public Records Act requires all writings of a public agency to be open to public inspection, except those records, disclosure of which is exempted or prohibited pursuant to federal or state law. So Public Records Act says all of our city documents must be public, except if there's an except where there's an exception, and federal law provides that exception. But the Brown Act makes it tricky for us, because the Brown Act says, as you saw in the first slide, that when we compile a staff report or an agenda packet, we need to include everything in there, present it to you for consideration, and that might include drawings. So if it's part of the agenda packet and we post the agenda packet online and anyone can access that document online, are we making something that's copyrighted a public record? So architectural work may only be reviewed at the planning department's premises. This is how we handle it internally at the city. If you want to look at architectural work, you have to come to City Hall, and we'll lay it all out for you. But members of the public can't copy it, we won't allow distribution to members of the public without permission of the design professional. Under this new law, the planning department may only make copies of this architectural work for internal review by the city, distribution to the legislative body ahead of the meeting, or for purposes of accessing it during the meeting where our project incorporating the copyrighted architectural work is being considered. And there's this big exception that's created. Site plans and massing diagrams are not similarly protected, and copies of these documents may be copied by and distributed to the public. So the law affirms that architectural work, so architectural drawings are going to be protected, but site plans and massing diagrams are not, and there was some confusion regarding that. So we won't be, we'll have to work with staff on this, but generally we won't be including copyrighted work in agenda packets. We can show them at the meetings. We can distribute them to the individual planning commissioners, but they shouldn't be provided in agenda packets. But site plans and massing diagrams can be included in agenda packets.
This only applies if the architect claims a copyright over the work.
No, it's a default rule.
Yeah.
It's a default rule, and we can only distribute it with the architect's permission.
Okay.
Any questions about this, Bill?
So this reconciles federal law with the Brown Act, which is state law.
Yeah, because we knew how the federal law interplayed with the Public Records Act, but the Brown Act was confusing things. So now we have some consistency across all three laws.
So I guess the issue is going to be what constitutes a site plan and a massing diagram.
Yeah, and for that, I'm going to defer to Director Gonzalez.
I mean, I totally understand like construction drawings, those aren't, but we don't look at that kind of stuff. We look at, preliminary, stuff, so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how this works out.
Well, but if I'm reading this correctly, it can still be in our packets. It just
Yeah.
can't be in the agenda packet.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So we can still get them the same way we get them
For the
today.
public,
It's
when
for
they
the
see
public
it,
viewing, yeah.
But can you give us the copies electronically?
We can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have to take public comment on presentations? No? Okay. All right, next up is public hearing, Municipal Code Text Amendment, MCTA 22-06, an ordinance amending Chapter 17.22, accessory dwelling units of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code to conform to state housing law. Are we doing this in conjunction with well, I guess we had to do each hearing separately, so.
Yeah, we have 2 public hearings. This is the first, and both will be delivered by Associate Planner Wolf.
Good evening. To open the public hearing for the ADU update, I'd just like to start by responding to all the questions that the Planning Commission posed at the last meeting. The first one was, can city require fire sprinklers in all primary dwelling units so that fire sprinklers are required in the ADU as well? And outright, the answer is no, but there are certain circumstances which could allow for that to happen. So I'm going to show a short presentation. Okay, so on screen are some examples and situations which fire sprinklers will be required for the ADU. So in this first example, it's kind of a site plan showing the street on the right side of the slide. And when a primary residence has fire sprinklers existing and there's a proposed new construction ADU, it will be required to have fire sprinklers installed. Another example would be when the ADU is proposed, and let's say the primary residence does not have fire sprinklers existing. If the ADU is located somewhere in the 150-foot depth mark on the property, it will be required to have fire sprinklers per fire marshal's recommendation. And that's due to the 150-foot mark here is kind of a rule of thumb, but there's more variables that play into this. But at 150 feet, fire department cannot reach if there is a fire in the back there. So that's where fire sprinklers would be deemed necessary. Other standard examples include where the primary residence is required to install fire sprinklers, then a new construction ADU could also be required to install fire sprinklers. Example of that might be where the primary residence is proposing an 80%, and really the threshold is 70% or more remodel of its existing space. It would be required fire sprinklers, and then therefore the new construction ADU would be required fire sprinklers. And another example would be where there's an addition. This is representing 100%, but the threshold is 50%. So 50% or more of an addition to a primary residence would cause fire sprinklers to be installed in the primary residence and thus to the proposed new construction ADU. Otherwise, let's say going back to this example, if the ADU were less than 150 foot deep on the property, it would not be required to have fire sprinklers. And many other common examples include a conversion of existing structures. If the existing structure does not have fire sprinklers, it would not be required to install fire sprinklers for conversion solely.
Can I ask a quick question, or should we wait till he finishes it?
Yeah, we should ask questions of each one of these points.
Sure.
So if the ADU in the, further down in the lot, if any portion of it is beyond the 150, it triggers it, right?
Any portion, yes.
Right, okay, not just,
Not the whole of the structure, any portion of it, yes.
okay. And I think the 150 foot is a hose reach kind of dimension, right? So,
3
Yes.
sticks would be my guess.
Yes. All right, moving on. The next question was, can an ADU ever be limited to a 16-foot height? Since the moment an ADU is added, the lot becomes multifamily. So I'll just read it out. The 16-foot height limit may be imposed when an existing condition of the property is such that there is only one dwelling unit. So many situations involve proposed addition of an ADU to an existing single-family residence. And that's where 16-foot height limit is imposed. If there is an existing multifamily residence, then they get 18 feet. But in most situations, the limitation to single-family residence is one ADU and one JADU. And a JADU is a conversion of existing single-family space residential area. So let's say someone does have one single-family residence that has a JADU, then it is then multifamily. They can have an 18-foot detached ADU.
And one clarification, that JADU can't exceed 500 square feet, so that's an odd 500-foot structure. That's really tall.
Well, you could just be on the second story, right?
Or it could be on the second.
Yeah.
Two 250-foot rooms, but then wouldn't that constitute, couldn't you make 2 dwelling units out of that? Upper and lower?
So in new state law, yeah, you can create a JADU out of any existing residential space on a property. It technically is proposed, but if we're looking at it in terms of proposed, we're looking at the proposed portion prior to conversion, so that would have to comply with underlying zoning requirements as a proposed addition.
Well, I mean, if you had a 250 square foot garage or something, and then you just went up and added, and that became your JADU, and you just bumped the roof up and had an 8-foot plate, you could double that space and have 2 rooms, correct?
If the garage is attached to the building, yes, that
Attached
would,
garage,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, moving on. So the next question was, does a 60-day approval time include the limit included in an appeal process? And can there be an appeal of an ADU approval? That question is pretty much moot at this point, considering that this had some non-discretionary, non-ministerial review. Appeal-wise, we decided to remove that altogether.
So, if somebody wants to appeal an ADU, either the applicant denial or a neighbor saying that it's okay, at that point, they just have to file a writ of mandamus and sue in court.
Correct.
And there's really not much we can do with that, right? Because state law said we have to be within the 60 days and we have to be ministerial, so, I mean, it seems like a tough way to appeal, but I don't see any way out of that box, so.
Yeah, in reviewing and having this discussion with Planner Wolf, it came to our attention that similar language is included in SB 9 and AB 803, and we've included appeal provisions in there. So in some future cleanup, we'll probably have to strike those appeal provisions in those laws, because those laws also say ministerial, no public hearing.
Yeah, well, I expect future state law will clarify this, because it seems like a system that doesn't work, but I think the way y'all have handled it, given what we're presented, makes sense, so, thanks.
Okay, moving on. Next question was, for an R3 zone or other multifamily zones where the Housing Accountability Act applies, can objective criteria apply up to a certain height? Then if building code goes higher than that certain height, subjective criteria can be imposed? Paraphrase that question a bit, but if there is an objective zoning criteria for height, such as 25 feet, and a proposed development proposes higher than 25 feet, then that would be a variance and discretionary review can be applied. And it's
do
no
we-
longer protected by Housing Accountability
And
Act.
do we have to have standard variance criteria, or can we have additional criteria? Additional findings?
Yeah, the variance findings are statutory, but whether we can have additional findings, I'm not sure. Let me see if I can confirm
So,
that.
I mean, the question would be, say, you have to get a variance and a design review permit. I mean, effectively, somehow get those findings into the request, whether it's requiring both permits or just, putting those findings in, that's really the fundamental question.
Right, yeah. I think I can confirm that in a moment.
So, considering all these questions that were raised, certain amendments were made. So to 1722-030 D4, that was rewritten to give emphasis to the criteria for an 18-foot height limit, that it be multifamily and multi-story. And there was some other reworking to that to include that multifamily be more than one dwelling unit existing on site. Other section amendments included the rental restrictions, just changing the word may to shall, and then finally deleting the appeals procedure. That concludes my report.
All right. So I guess public comment
Sure.
and then deliberation? At this time, if anybody would like to come forward and speak on this agendized item, you may do so. Seeing none, we'll bring it back for deliberation. So fire sprinklers, I'm not done.
You're not done.
I'm not done.
He's gonna use the gavel on this one.
Yeah, the gavel's coming out. Be warned. So I guess the way that it had been explained to us, and maybe it had been watered down the way that it was explained to us. It had been explained to us multiple times that however whatever was required of the main building would be what's required of the ADU from a sprinkler perspective. Which is a bit different than this that says that there are different items that trigger it. And so I guess I'm looking for that clarification. Is it truly that we're matching whatever the condition is for the main building in our determination, or is it codified differently?
So let me first answer the 150-foot example. So the ADU law is intended to prevent the city from adopting development standards that make it harder for it to build ADUs, and one of the things the legislators determined make it difficult is fire sprinklers. But that doesn't impact the application of state law. And so that fire marshal requirement for the 150-foot rule, that's a state provision, so that once that's triggered, the ADU law needs to comply with that requirement. So hopefully that answers the question about the 150-foot example.
Wasn't worried about that one, but thank you for that clarification. So what I'm saying is, anytime you build a new building in town, you have to sprinkle it.
Anytime you build a new building in town, if you build a new building with an ADU.
If you
yes.
build a new building in town, you have to sprinkle it.
Right.
100% of the time.
Right.
They are building new buildings as ADUs. Our code says you have to sprinkle 100% of new buildings. Why can we not roll that through to ADUs as well? The life safety is just as important in an ADU as it is in a regular home.
State law prevents us from doing that. Unless.
Okay, let me hear the unless.
Yeah, unless one of the examples that Planner Wolf pointed out is triggered, or the ADU is being constructed alongside a new home. Or whenever that new home was constructed, if it was constructed recently, and the sprinkler requirement applied, then the ADU construction that comes subsequently can also be required to have sprinklers.
How can ADUs be exempted from life safety consideration?
I think that's a policy decision made that I don't have an answer to.
So the law specifically prohibits us
I can quote it, yeah.
from requiring sprinklers.
Yeah, I'll quote it for you.
Because they see
Says-
it as overburdening, is that why?
Yeah.
It's
That's what, yeah, I mean, it's obvious, because that was their intention. Just like, they don't want to make it so you have to have architectural design, you can just put the box, stucco.
But why is life safety less important there?
Well,
So here's the word for word what the provision says. It says, the installation of fire sprinklers shall not be required in any accessory dwelling unit if sprinklers are not required for the primary residence. The construction of accessory dwelling unit shall not trigger a requirement for fire sprinklers to be installed in the existing multifamily dwelling.
Okay, so then we're clear. We can require it. Because the way that you just said that law, it says, if it is required. It is required for new construction in this town to be sprinkled.
If sprinklers are not required for the primary residence, and that's been interpreted to mean at the time the primary dwelling was constructed, if sprinklers were required at that time, only then can we have sprinklers in the new construction. And that interpretation comes from HCD's interpretation of the statute, and I will cite that for you next.
So, if I may, it has been expressed to be a burden to install fire sprinklers, and it's not just about putting fire sprinkler heads in the home. It's about increasing the water meter from 3/4 inch to 1 inch. It's a big cost on the water bill side, initially and over time.
But why is it less important in an ADU?
It isn't. I was just expressing some burden.
Cost and
Right,
utility.
so here's HCD's interpretation of this statute. It says installation of fire sprinklers may not be required in ADUs where sprinklers were not required by building codes for the existing primary residence.
Okay.
So it has a retrospective look.
Okay, that was the part that hadn't been shared before. So that does it. Thank you. Now I give up.
I think you need to contact an assembly member.
Yeah, right, your congressman. Okay.
Did anybody have any other deliberation on any of the other stuff?
No, I think staff did a great job here. I question the policy on not having appeals, but again, that's not something we do. I know the city council just recently lowered appeals fees on certain things because we want to make sure people in the town have a right to be heard. It seems like appealing directly with a lawsuit seems like a really onerous way to do this, but you know, the state law and their infinite wisdom, state legislature has told us that's the way it has to be, so it is.
I'm fine with it. The explanation was good. Great presentation, thank you.
I'm good, yeah, thank you.
Any other edits to what was presented? Nope. Then I will entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of Planning Commission Resolution 23-03, recommending the City Council adopt ordinance to amending Chapter 1722.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Sure. With regards to Vice Chair Hutt's question, the statute or the cases interpreting the statute regarding variances does state that the legislative body has broad discretion in exercising approval of a variance. I interpret that to mean that you can include other factors beside the statutory requirements in a variance. You can consider other factors in your decision to approve a variance or not.
Okay.
And whether you want to codify those or you don't want to codify them, I think that's going to be up to the city council, but it is an option available.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think that can inform us in later code updates. I mean, I don't think it has anything to do with the ADU law that we just recommended approval, but that's good to know. Thank you.
All right, next we have a presentation on Municipal Code Text Amendment, MCTA 23-01, General Ordinance Cleanup.
All right, I'll go on and continue with that presentation, and it's just another response per questions made at the last meeting. I just skipped there, I'm sorry. So one comment brought up was that the footnotes at the end of section 1736.020, that's the commercial code, should be corrected to reference their respective sections appropriately. There was further comment about the reference to residential development within the prime storefront area. And again, recapturing the definitions, amending section 1708 per ordinance 1431 from a while ago. That was a commercial code update, which missed the definition amendment, was to be included in the draft ordinance, and that was re-included in the ordinance part about that. Moving on, the next issue brought up was the definition of main commercial street, that it should also include the westerly 2/3 of East Montecito Avenue between Baldwin and Mountain Trail Avenue. And the next issue brought up was that as it reads now, the code would allow, oh, I'm sorry, I already went over that point, the residential in the storefront area. So to address these, the footnotes were added at the end of section, amended at the end of section 1736.020, reviewed and revised appropriately, and also making mention of and addressing the concerns regarding the residential uses in the prime storefront area. Definitions were added into the draft ordinance, and then regarding the East Montecito definition, in the meeting for City Council way back in 2020, at second reading, that language was struck from the definition at the wishes of City Council, and it was meaningfully not included in the final definition. So I didn't want to bring it up as a cleanup item. I'd rather bring that up if it was the wish of Planning Commission to bring it up as a substantive code update. And then following along with the thought on removing appeal process for ministerial reviews, I also included a deletion of the appeals procedures for small home lot development and ministerial design review. That concludes my report.
Any questions for staff?
No questions.
Yeah, I want to address the main commercial street, but we can do that in deliberations, not really a question.
All right, thank you. At this time, anybody who would like to speak on this particular agendized item may come before the podium and do so. Hearing none, we'll bring it back for deliberation. Vice Chair Hutt.
I think this, again, staff's done a great job here. There's a lot of good updates. I have two proposed tweaks, and the first one is with regard to the definition of main commercial street. The comment was we didn't want to update that because there was a comment when it was updating about Montecito, and that comment was, do not include the Montecito district in the commercial code updates except as necessary to clean up provisions or references as you recommend. So this wasn't a policy statement from the City Council that they liked the Montecito district. They just didn't want to attack it wholesale, and they just wanted to fix the issues that we're dealing with cross-references and cleanups. So you'll remember that in last year, we actually addressed some of those cross-references and cleanups in Montecito already. In section 1740.010, there is a specific reference to commercial zone uses and cross-references that we cleaned up. And then we also cleaned up some typos and whatnot and deleted bunny slaughter. So it is, I think, within what the definition of cleanup and cross-reference fixes that the City Council has already considered in East Montecito to address this. Further, the issue with regard to the main commercial street is to figure out where, the main issue there is to figure out where residential uses are allowed. And so one of the things we're doing in the commercial code is we're saying you can't build, you can't have residential uses in the prime storefront area, which is the ground floor 50 feet back, right? And the definition of prime storefront area is 50 feet back from a main commercial street. And so there's a specific general plan policy that says in the commercial zone, residential is not allowed except above and behind, right? So we're fixing that issue through this cleanup. But there's also a general plan policy with regard to artisan mixed use, which is general plan East for the East Montecito, that says, and that's policy L37.7, that says we should accommodate housing units on the second level or to the rear of buildings provided that blah, 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 and in the easterly third of the artisan mixed use area. So the 2/3, 1/3 thing is not just language that came out of nowhere, it's directly from the general plan. So this is a cross-reference cleanup that we're fixing for the commercial code and then cross-referencing into the industrial area. So it seems to me we should clean this up as well, because it's the same issue. We're just cleaning up in both places. I mean, I can't imagine why the city council would say, wait a minute, you identified an issue where there's a flaw in the code that allows residential where we don't want it, and you fixed it in the commercial code, and it cross-references to Montecito, which we've already fixed cross-references, and then you didn't fix that? That doesn't make sense to me. So I think we should fix that definition so that the main commercial street applies to that portion of Montecito that the general plan says we shouldn't have residential on the ground floor in the front. And so we do that by appending to the definition and the westerly 2/3 of East Montecito Avenue between Baldwin Avenue and Mountain Trail. That's my first point. My second is,
Should we deliberate on that point?
sure,
I agree.
okay?
Does that mean change, is the 1/3 language you want to change it? Are you gonna tell us what you want the language to change to?
Yeah, I would append to the definition of main commercial street, which now says Sierra Madre and Baldwin. I would just add to that, and the westerly 2/3 of East Montecito Avenue between Baldwin and Mountain Trail. And the general plan says residential uses are allowed in the easterly third, so this is just the other way to say the negative of that part.
So just a question, and since I wasn't involved with any of this before, is the Montecito area, which I know we kind of designate as industrial, but it's also could be sort of an artist loft or those kinds of things. If we apply the same thing of non-residential in a storefront area, now that we're designating that street as being a commercial street, commercial area, then it would restrict residential is similarly the first 50 feet in and the storefront.
Right, but only on the ground floor. So
Right.
second
But
floor-
I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
being an artist loft, artist workspace, whatever it might be, does that restrict that area from being able to do what it wants to do? Or I'm just wondering.
Well, I mean, the policy perspective was addressed in the general plan, where it said that housing should be allowed on the second level or in the back or anywhere in the easterly third, so.
But just asking the question if it's,
Yeah, I think that we're specifically trying to not make any policy. We're specifically trying to clean up and make it so that
More
the code
consistent.
works.
Yeah.
Good catch.
Okay, the next one is even more minor, but I think it's worth fixing. And that's in section 1736.020A, which is the chart of allowed uses in the commercial code. Under residential uses, we have a footnote that talks about you can't have residential uses in the prime storefront, and then also references Measure V with regard to density. But and in that footnote, it says that residential uses, including SROs, are prohibited in the prime storefront area, which is all good. But I think we need to go into the chart itself and say residential uses, including SROs, which are permitted, because we don't have anywhere where we actually say that they're permitted. So I'd just like to add, in the line that says residential uses and then all, I'd just like to add residential uses, comma, including SROs. Because that was something that the HCD wanted us specifically to do per our housing element to allow SROs in the commercial zone. So that's my second point.
All right. Any comments on any of that?
That's good.
Thank you for doing that.
Good catch.
Otherwise, I'm good with all the code updates.
Okay. Does staff want to respond to that direction?
I think we're fine with both of those edits, yes.
Okay. Any other discussion on this?
None for me?
Then I guess I will look for a motion with those edits.
I'll move that we adopt Planning Commission Resolution 2304, recommending approval of Municipal Code Text Amendment 2301 with the noted corrections.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries unanimously. Planning Commission reports.
None for me?
I would like to point out to all of our existing planning commissions that the Form 700s are due March 30th, quickly approaching. If you haven't filled that out online, you should probably do that before you get a nice email.
I fear the gavel.
Not for me. It's not my gavel.
It only
I
took
know,
me
that's
2
why I
weeks to
fear
work
it.
on it.
I did it.
You've
Done.
already done it? Nice.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
Luckily for existing commissioners, you can import the last year's one, so it's not so bad. Doing it the first time is.
That's what I was doing. I was like, I had to read all this stuff.
All right. Any other planning commission reports?
I went up the trail since we've had all this rain. There's about a foot of snow at Orchard Camp. The bridge that was assembled by our former commission member and volunteers in the trail was perfectly intact. They were actually up there moving. Some dirt had slid down, and the trail, as of this last rain, was in great shape. So it's, if you want to go up and volunteer and they have picks and shovels, I'm sure they'll allow you to help. But it was in great shape. It held up good.
Great. Anything else? No?
I
All
enjoyed
right.
the 2 seconds of snow that we had, real briefly, so that was nice.
Yeah. Planning and Community Preservation Department reports.
So just to follow up with Councilmember Lowell, we do have a continued item going before the City Council on the 13th of March, which is the appeal for El Verno. It would be helpful to have a commissioner there representing the commission again if any questions come up. So I can appoint someone at your will. And also, one other item on our next meeting is scheduled for the 16th of March. And currently I do not have any agenda items scheduled, and most likely I will be canceling that meeting. That concludes my report.
No objection.
All right. Perfect. I guess hearing no other business, I will go ahead and call this meeting to a close.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the meeting on the 13th,